Welcome to the Recover You podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
from sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together, we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be. Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of Recover You. This is Kylene, and I'm going to do a solo episode this week. And this is just something that I have been thinking about. And so I thought I would do an episode with you. What's been on my mind is this idea that, generally speaking, when we are thinking about most things in life, extreme ends of the spectrum are generally humans like to feel certain, right? We like things to be black and white. We like things to feel complete. And so often we find certainty when you lean towards one end of a spectrum or another. And so you're more towards the extreme ends of a topic, of an opinion, of a whatever it might be, an emotion. And what I have generally found is that where there is nuance and a combination of things in the middle is generally where there is truth and where there is health. So I'm going to start with a silly example before I jump into the recovery concepts around this, but just to kind of like lay the foundation of what I'm talking about. The example I'm going to give is like the patriarchy is one end of the spectrum where a lot of people would say, hey, we don't like the patriarchy. It allows for abuse. It suppresses women. It, does all these things, right? And there's not equality in the genders and all this kind of stuff. And we could totally agree with that, but the answer would not be to swing to the opposite end of the spectrum and then go create a matriarchy, just as an example, right? So then women are in power, men are, in a submissive role, that sort of thing, right? So the idea is that we have in life, there are a lot of spectrums. There is a lot of nuance. There's a lot of blending. And it is often in the extremes that we feel very certain. Often we might feel emotions that feel more powerful, more concrete. It's less confusing, but a lot of times that is not where health resides. Health resides in the middle. And so in the example I gave, we really don't want to swing from only men being in control to only women being in control, right? Like that's not fair to anybody. We want to come into a place where there's equality, where people's talents and skills are recognized regardless of their gender, right? So that's sort of the foundation of what I'm going to be talking about today. And I'm just going to share several, what I would say, ends of the spectrum through recovery that we might tend to swing towards. And I do want to just also add in here before I jump in with the specifics that this is normal, right? This is a human experience. This isn't just subject to betrayed partners in recovery or addicts in recovery or anything like that. It's a human thing to want certainty. It's a human thing to go into protective modes, and trauma responses tend to swing towards an extreme. And I also want to clarify that it's not wrong when you find that in different parts of your journey, you may be swinging towards one side for a period of time. So I'll give some examples of that as we go along in terms of, hey, in this phase of the journey, you might be a little more towards this side, and then eventually you might be a little towards this side, right? The opposite side. But the idea that I really want to just sort of bring throughout this episode is that that's normal to be a little bit to the left on this, a little bit to the right over here, a little bit, but what we're trying to do is find the balance in the middle where health resides with all of these things. And so I just kind of wanted to offer that up as the foundation of the topics we're going to discuss today, finding balance between all of these things. So let's start off with one that would be I think all of these are going to be applicable to both people, but I think the idea of the extremes of hypersexuality versus hyposexuality throughout recovery can apply to both people. So hypersexuality is when we are overtly and overly sexual in our response to trauma, in our response to relational rupture. And hyposexuality is when we are under-responsive and we just shut it down completely. Now, here's an example of where both extremes are not healthy long-term, but you may find that one side of the spectrum is healthier at different phases of recovery. So, for example, we've talked about sexuality and sexual recovery a lot in many, many episodes, and you've probably heard me say several times that hypo, kind of shutting things down for a period of time, not engaging intimately, can be actually a healthy response for initial boundaries and stabilization relationally, for getting into sobriety, for all of these different things, right? So it's good to learn that you can be in a relationship without sex. It's good to learn that you can get through sobriety and not have sexual stimuli, and you can rebalance your brain and your body and all of these things, right? And if you are in a relationship long-term, 3 years into recovery, at that point, 2 years in, 3 years in, whatever it might be, everybody's timeline is going to be a little different. But if hyposexuality, there's no sexuality, there's no connection in this area, there's no, I just really want to live like a monk forever, I want to live like a nun forever, I don't want to hold your hand, I don't want to be intimate, I don't want to work towards intimacy, I have no desire to even work towards it, that can also be an unhealthy trauma response, just like hypersexuality, where we are overly sexually responsive, can be a trauma response to feel loved, to feel needed, to feel connection. And what I would say there is generally that's a false sense. We've mentioned that several times of we don't want to use the chemicals and the chemical bonding of the sexual experience to replace actual connection or to give us a false sense of connection. So those are just a couple examples. So then what, the middle dot that we're trying to aim for there is healthy sexuality, right? We want to create healthy sexuality in our own bodies, safety in our own bodies individually, and we want to create healthy sexuality and connection between the couples navigating recovery. And all of these are going to just be sort of ideas that I'm going to lay out there and let you sort of think on where do I fall on the spectrum of this? But there are several that I'm going to go through. And so each one of these is not, the podcast topic itself. So they might seem kind of short, but they're really just seeds to get you thinking about where am I on the spectrum? And then what does healthy look like? So the next one I'm going to talk about is the idea of empathy versus boundaries. Now, this is one that comes up quite a lot when I'm talking to betrayed partners, because the partners that I receive in my coaching practice, I would say a high percent of them tend to swing very far over to the empathy side of the spectrum. And sometimes that can show up as overprotecting the addict's feelings, overthinking about protecting the addict from stress or from the reality and the consequences of their behavior, because you see that they are remorseful. And so holding a boundary might feel like punishment. And so I will see a lot of betrayed partners really struggle with this idea of boundaries versus compassion and empathy. And a lot of times they will swing very far to the empathy side. And what you often see there is people that struggle with boundaries and overemphasize compassion and empathy to their partners, or just to people in general. A lot of times they will have beliefs inside of themselves, pain points or woundings in their own life that has caused them to believe that other people's needs are more important than themselves. And so the reason that empathy only is a problem, well, for the betrayed partner, empathy only means she's overstepping her need for safety, because boundaries are required in healthy relationships after something like betrayal and finding out, that your reality is not your reality. So boundaries are very, very important to create safety. And all healthy relationships have boundaries. So if we don't want to set them, a lot of times a betrayed partner will have some sort of wounding in their life that has led them to believe that they just are not as valuable as other people. Other people's problems are more important than theirs. And one of the highest values that perhaps they were shaped to learn in some way in their younger years is that keeping the peace is a really high value. And so how can I do that? And again, the reason that's problematic is because a lot of times that means we are overstepping our own needs. We are not using our voice. We're not sharing our own opinions. We're trying to mold into fitting into a relationship based on what we interpret the other person might need versus what we may need. And that would be the same for the addict, right? As we go through recovery, we are two individuals that need to do work in all of these areas to kind of find balance in the middle so that we are treating each other in the healthiest way in a partnership, right? And so let's give an example on the addict side where an addict that maybe has so much empathy for the pain that they have caused their betrayed partner. Let's say they're 5 or 6 years down the road and they still don't feel like they can use their voice to share their concerns or their goals or their opinions if they have any disagreement with their betrayed partner, for example. And so that, they feel like what they have done is so bad and so wrong that they never get to say anything ever in disagreement with their partner ever again, right? And so then we're staying stuck in these trauma points instead of doing the healing work and coming into the middle where we have two people that share their voices with each other, share their concerns, share their burdens, have the same vision, help each other through it. Okay, so on the opposite side of the empathy spectrum is the boundaries only or the control spectrum. So this is where we really can't feel too much compassion or empathy. We find our certainty and our empowerment in a sense of trying to control the other person, and or you could word that in, I'm only going to set boundaries, but there's not a lot of empathy or compassion kind of present there, right? And so that can be harmful as well because we have this false sense of control that we're trying to get where, I feel more certain if I can be angry at my partner. I feel more empowered if I'm angry at my partner. And I'm going to lash out. I'm going to throw all of this control, this attempt at control. I'm going to only set these boundaries and never listen to anything that my partner is, because they just don't deserve anything in life because they've hurt me, right? And there's a resentfulness and a bitterness and an anger associated on that end of the spectrum, right? So then again, what is healthy? It's somewhere in the middle where we have compassion and empathy and we stand in our own safety and our own groundedness and our own integrity and authenticity, and we can hold those boundaries and communicate respectfully with our partner. And again, all of these can go bi-directionally, right? So anyone that oversteps their safety to express empathy is probably dealing with some people-pleasing tendencies. And that can be a trauma response, or if it's not a trauma response, it can just be an unhealthy pattern in our life, right? And only trying to control, only trying to have boundaries, and not having any empathy and compassion can also be harmful individually and relationally. Okay, the next one is the desire to have the answer day one versus staying in the relationship too long. So it's like this one is sort of I'm going to reword the first part. I have to have the answer day one. I'm going to reword that, making decisions out of a heightened emotional state. So that's one end of the spectrum. I'm extremely I just found out today and I'm going to make a decision about my relationship today. That's one end of the spectrum. And then the opposite end of the spectrum is staying in the relationship too long. Like I have all of the evidence that I need. I'm not getting any positive affirmation that this is going anywhere, but I'm still hoping, nothing's changing, right? So again, both of these are sort of opposite ends of the spectrum and unhealthy and can have potential issues. So I have to have the answer day one, or the idea of I'm going to respond out of emotion. Generally, what I have found in my life, and I think this is, again, human, I think this would apply to everybody, but when I feel triggered or activated by something, I am not going to have the most logical I'm not going to feel the best about how I respond in that moment. Like even if it's, let's say I receive an email from somebody and it triggers a wound in me, if I respond before that has calmed down in my nervous system and I send an email reply the minute I get that, I may regret that the next day because I didn't have enough time to think through, okay, well, let me process this first of all. How do I really feel about this? Why did that activate me, right? What wound is that hitting, or what insecurity is that hitting? And how do I want to reply to show up according to the version of myself that I value, the authentic version that is kind, that has integrity, that is sincere, that offers compassion to people, that sort of thing. So a lot of times if we respond to something in the height of emotion, a lot of times we'll regret that. Now, I will put the caveat here that there are times and situations where people might find something out and make a decision as soon as they find out, and they're not necessarily wrong for doing that, right? So I always give the examples of my ex-husband and my current husband, Patrick, and how my responses to them were very different because they were different people and they were different life situations, and they responded differently to how they hurt me. So, and I responded differently to how they hurt me. And so, like when I think about my ex-husband, when I found out that he was unfaithful, my decision there was very fast. And, but there had also been a lead up to that of all of these problems, right? With Patrick, there was no lead up of problems really, not significantly anyway. And so I had the extreme emotion, I had the extreme pain, I had the extreme trauma, I had the high activation, emotional activation. But I chose to move through that initial heightened stress response to give it time to gather evidence. So I will say, again, we're going to swing towards one side of these or the other, depending on the context, depending on the timing of recovery. And what we're trying to do is just kind of think, what is the healthiest that we can get to, right? And so very often, and that's why I'm saying maybe not always, but very often responding in the height of emotion doesn't always go well for us. I mean, just think about, I call it trigger tennis, when two partners activate each other and push each other's buttons, and they get into a conversation where it's just back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and they keep getting more activated, and they're triggering each other, and the conversation gets more escalated and more escalated and more escalated. I call that trigger tennis, where it's just like we're going back and forth, and then that becomes a pattern relationally, right? Well, one of the reasons that happens is because if somebody says something, and then our brain and our nervous system respond, and then we respond in that activation mode when our brain was triggered by that, generally we are responding then also in a heightened state. And so then you have heightened state and activation and stress responding to heightened state, activation and stress, and then that goes back and forth and back and forth. So it's just another example of how when we respond in heightened states, a lot of times it leads to these patterns that we turn around the next day and go, oh, why did I do that? Why couldn't I just take a breath, And again, this is human, right? I've had some situations where I will respond in a very heightened way. And a lot of times, or I'll say sometimes when that happens, it's because I was really taken off guard by something. I was so surprised maybe that this person holds this opinion, or that sounded really unhealthy, but I want to kind of jump into a conversation about that, but I'm feeling activated about that perspective because I was so surprised by it, or, whatever that might look like. And then when I look back, I'm like, man, I should have asked more questions. I should have taken a breath, right? And so it's a learning process, but again, we're talking about patterns. We're talking about not that we're never going to make mistakes, but if we're living in one of these ends of the spectrums, it's generally not healthy. So then when you switch to the opposite end, it's like, okay, hey, I'm going to respond to the relationship. I'm going to respond in the heightened emotion versus I'm not going to respond in the heightened emotion. I'm going to wait. Then you can get all the way to the opposite end of the spectrum where we are staying and staying and staying and staying and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And we're staying in this relationship and we're investing and nothing is improving. And we just think, well, maybe sometimes what I will see on this end of the spectrum is that I have hope in the person that I think they are capable of being, instead of basing hope on the reality of the evidence that they are demonstrating to me today. And those are very, very different. So when we are placing our hope and when we are staying in a relationship, I always encourage that it's based on action and evidence. When we have an idea of what somebody could be because they have the potential within them, and we are basing our current and future decisions on that potential and not on the reality of what they are showing us can be true or is true now, then that's when it's a little bit more to that end of the spectrum of staying too long without real evidence. And, that can be tricky, right? Because all humans are capable of recovery. All humans are capable of change. It would make sense that we want to believe that our partner is capable. And someday, if I wait just long enough, if I word something this way, if I give it another week, if I hand them another resource, right? But there does come a point where if they are not taking action on their recovery, then and things are not improving relationally and you guys aren't working together as a team, there does come a point where it's stayed beyond reality. And now it is based in this false hope of this perception of what I want versus the reality of what is. So when you swing back to the other side of responding in, the height of emotion, I know I did this early on in discovery where I was like throwing boundaries out like it was my job. They weren't really bad. They were just like these, I would hear something and I'd be like, well, you're going to go do blah, 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 in response to what I was hearing. And so again, there's a time and a place and, I was doing what I could with the information I had at the time, which was not much. It was within the first 24, 72 hours, right? So when you are thinking about, sometimes I'm going to fall in this end, well, that's really early in discovery and I'm going to respond emotionally because, the bomb just went off in my life, right? There's nothing technically, quote unquote wrong with that, right? Like I don't want to say, that's bad or anything like that. What we're talking about is sort of long-term patterns again, just to reiterate. If I was still reacting that way now, 5 years later, and my nervous system and my brain were activated and I was constantly reacting in an elevated, stressed out state, that would be a problem if that was a long-term pattern. Okay, so then what's in the middle, right? The middle is we learn as humans to regulate our emotions, to take those breaths. Now, again, we're not always going to be perfect, right? Something might take you off guard. We might get upset about something, but it's like the general patterning, right? Like how do we communicate? How do we respond to life? Can we sit through the discomfort of getting that email, of getting that surprise, of hearing that comment? Can we sit through the discomfort of the emotions that come up inside of us? Take a breath, give it 24 hours, reply tomorrow? Can we, if our partner brings something up and actually here's a good example. Something was happening the other day with me and Patrick and he knocked something over that was like really expensive. So my voice elevated because I was getting a little cranky about, hey, can you not do that, right? And then his voice elevated to say, hey, like, why are you yelling at me, right? And that was it. So instead of playing trigger tennis where we then go, well, I'm going to yell at you and then you're going to yell at me and then I'm going to, then we were able to quickly calm down and discuss, hey, this is kind of, I'm sorry I yelled at you, but this is kind of, what I was feeling or, we resolved it very, very quickly. So that's kind of my example of, or an example of, we're not always going to be perfect when we are living mostly in the middle, right? We are human. We are going to have responses. But do we generally live in a place of calm? Do we generally live in a state where we can allow the discomfort to move through? Our reactions, can we catch ourselves? Do we have tools and resources? And do we, if we're staying in a coupleship, do we work on that together so that our communication is better and is healthy and is calmer, that sort of thing. So that one was reacting to the emotions in the moment, throwing things out there or leaving the relationship day one, versus the opposite end of that is staying in the relationship way too long with no evidence that things are going to change. And then the healthy, of course, is somewhere in the middle. I've gathered the evidence that I need. I feel good about myself as a human being because I've done the work, I've healed the wounds, and now I'm making a decision, a conscious choice based on what is healthy, that I'm either going to move forward on my own without the relationship, or I am choosing to be in this because I see there's evidence that this can be healthy for both of us. Okay, the next one is shame versus self-love. So this one would be really common with the addict side where One end of the spectrum is where they are just feeling so much shame and they are just shame spiraling and they just cannot get out of the shame that they are a horrible person. And then that shame is triggering, reactive behaviors, and they're still acting out and they're still trying to self-medicate. And they're just, it's that really negative, dark pattern of I'm horrible. And so I'm not worth anything. And if I'm not worth anything, then I better do this behavior that will temporarily medicate me, but that's going to prove that I'm not worth anything. And then you just end up in this spiral. And the opposite end of the spectrum is self-love with no self-reflection, right? And that's where I can do no wrong, narcissistic sort of it's all about me. I'm not going to have any empathy for my partner. There's no, it's just deflection, blame, manipulation, that sort of thing, where it's just me, 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 me. And both of those are extremely unhealthy, right? So we talked about several episodes ago, the idea that, shame is just an emotion like any other emotion that God has given us. And there's a time and a place for it. But when it rules our lives and our behaviors and gets out of control and is the primary thing and we're spiraling in it, it's become an unhealthy amount, right? Shame is really supposed to be one of those things that just comes up as a red flag and deters us from continuing down that path. But once it's gotten rooted in the addiction cycle, we really have to work hard to break that so this is an example of when you might swing a little harder in the beginning to the self-love and self-reflection side, where it's, or the self-love side, where it's hey, I am valuable and I need to actually believe that I'm someone of value, even that I've done this bad thing. But, if we swing all the way over into that side without self-reflection and we don't maintain that, hey, what I did was bad and I'm going to take ownership of this, and I feel guilty if I think about it, and I feel sad if I think about it, and I'm sorry for the harm that I've done, right? Both of those extremes can be really harmful in our life. And so the healthy middle is where we are able to release the shame and say, I am not at my core a bad person, but I did a bad thing. And of course I feel guilty about that. And I'm going to take responsibility for that. I'm going to take ownership. I'm going to accept the natural consequences that are, lack of trust and, whatever it is that my partner needs for their safety and all of those sorts of things, right? Where it is, right in the middle of course I feel guilt about this, but I'm taking ownership of it and I can feel proud of that. And now I'm standing in integrity because I'm not doing this thing anymore that makes me feel shame. And I can actually feel proud of the work that I'm doing in recovery, right? Shame and self-love, of course that can hit the betrayed partner as well, right? We feel a lot of shame. We absorb shame that is not ours to have. When we initially find out. It feels really embarrassing. It feels really difficult. It feels really painful to tell people, hey, this is what happened in my life. And we absorb some of that shame as if it is ours. We could also swing to the other side of way too much self-love in terms of, recovery has to be all about me. And maybe I'm not going to listen to anything that the addict is learning. I'm not going to support them at all. I'm not going to be their partner through this. I'm not going to, help them or encourage them, or I'm just so separated. It's just me, right? And so anytime that there's just extreme selfishness or there's extreme self-degradation, those ends of the spectrum are going to be problematic internally, in our own lives, and relationally, of course. That's going to be really unattractive and unhelpful for a coupleship. But in the middle, when we can be, full of integrity and we can say, yes, I've done bad things, I've hurt people, I feel guilt about the bad things that I've done, but we can blend that with taking ownership for our lives and the choices that we're making and empowering ourselves. Hey, today gets to be a new day. Tomorrow gets to be a new day. And this goes for everybody, right? Betrayed partner, addicted partner, any human listening, that every day is a new opportunity, like we say at the end of our podcast, to choose health and freedom. So every day we get to create a life that we're proud of. And that is one of the things that, a lot of times the 12-step programs or, the Alcoholics Anonymous, they say one day at a time, right? Now we push a little bit through that when we're talking about the recovery process ourselves here with Recover You, where we say, hey, don't think that you have to struggle forever. It's not like you're struggling every single day for the rest of your life. That's not what we mean. But the one day at a time is like, hey, today gets to be a better day than yesterday, right? Like I get to create a life that I want. The betrayed partner gets to move through recovery and go, who do I want to be as a human being? What are the pain points that this has brought up, and how do I heal from this? And what kind of life do I want to create? And oh, by the way, we're starting from scratch. Actually, we're starting from negative. How do I create a relationship? What does a relationship look like that is healthy to me, that I want? Like I get to start over here. Same thing for the addict, right? Everything has come out into the light. It feels horrible. It feels scary. It feels dark. It feels overwhelming, right? Every day is a new opportunity that you get to say, hey, I'm sober today. I get to feel better about myself. I get to build integrity. I get to build self-empowerment. I get to help my partner. I get to be a kind, compassionate, empathetic person who takes ownership and creates a life that I feel really proud of. I feel really good about that. And every single person listening has the capability of doing that. And if you do that enough days in a row, you're going to create a life, and potentially, if you're staying together, a relationship that you are really happy in, that you love, that you enjoy, that you feel very fulfilled with. So that's kind of the middle there, shame versus self-love. Okay, reflection versus future focus. So again, these are going to, you're going to lean one side or the other, depending on where you are in your recovery journey, right? But both of them at different points can be unhealthy. So if we stay in the reflection, looking in the past too long, that can hinder our recovery. So just as as a betrayed partner, for example, if I am constantly sitting 5 years later, sitting around thinking about how my husband has hurt me and the details of what that means, and I am just still really reflecting on and sitting with and thinking about all those things, that's going to hurt me. And if we're staying in the relationship, it's certainly going to hurt the relationship, and that it's not going to lead to health or calmness or safety in my nervous system or anything like that, right? Same thing for the addict. If they are living every single day in that shame spiral, right, of reflecting on the past and all these horrible things that they've done, it's going to be really difficult for them to get out of that shame spiral. So if we stay in the self-reflection and the looking towards the past too long, it can hurt us. But if we future focus, can also become a problem in the wrong moments. So let's say that we are 1 week, 2 weeks into discovery as a betrayed partner, and my goal in life is, how can I get through this, right? Which is normal, by the way. If you've said that, if you feel that, that it's normal, right? That's everybody's thing, is how do I get through this, right? So if we are so focused on, we're 2 weeks into this, we're super shocked about everything that we have found. And then our response to that is, how can I get around this, move it through it? How can I basically, how can I get back to a life that feels normal? That is focusing too far in the future too soon. And that can really hinder our healing, because what just happened was really dramatic. What happened was really traumatic. What happened was really shocking. And if we don't take the time to allow ourselves to feel the reality of that, to sit with the reality of that, to process the emotions that come with that, then we will not be able to achieve a full state of healing that can be really beautiful in the future, right? And the same thing for the addict, right? When you're thinking about focusing too much on the future, they can sometimes want things to move too fast, right? Maybe relationally would be an example where they're like, "Hey, I've been 6 months sober. Why aren't we having great sex yet?" Or why are you still mad at me? Or why are you getting triggered? It's been 2 years, right? Or why did you ask me a question? Or those sorts of things. They might want to get to a place of healing that hasn't yet had the opportunity to. The individuals haven't had the opportunity to get there yet. The nervous system hasn't had the time allotted that it needs, or the evidence, or whatever, right? This is not a process that, if you do everything and check every box, is done in 6 months. It generally is a progressive process of 2 to 5 years before you feel really like, okay, we are kind of back to normal. We're at a baseline, or we're creating something really, really good and different and new, and this is positive, right? It takes a lot of time. So both of those can be problematic if we are focused on them at the wrong time or for too long. So focusing on the past or focusing on the future too long or at the wrong times. And so what's going to be the healthy, what's going to be in the middle is, what is happening right now. So in the beginning, we will be focusing on the past, and the betrayed partner they have to, because they didn't, when the bad things were happening, they didn't know about it. So there will be a period of time, naturally and normally and rightly so, that the betrayed partner kind of has to focus on the past while the addict is moving forward. So just to kind of clarify, that's really, really normal. And they have to do that because they didn't have the opportunity to do it while the betrayal was happening. But over time, as healing occurs, as the disclosure process has happened, as we get the information and we can offer consent and we can begin healing the wounds, as the addict gets into recovery and creates some safety and stability in the relationship and in their sobriety and all these kinds of things, ultimately, we want to begin assessing what is the evidence we have for our individual healing and for our relationship capacity right now. And we want to be able to go, what do I need today to feel safe? What do I need today? So there's a lot of focusing in on present, while we also hold a view of the future. We talk about that all the time, the view of what is healthy. But that is in relation to the reality that is today. So we kind of combine those. There's a combination that is kind of a healthy in the middle. Okay, the next one is forgiveness versus accountability. So we've talked a lot about forgiveness in the podcast, how often I believe things are lumped in with the concept of forgiveness that don't need to be lumped in, and it offers a lot of confusion, and sometimes it can compromise people's healings if they associate certain things with forgiveness. And so sometimes we want to, one end of the spectrum is I forgive you, and forgiveness means I don't hold you accountable. Forgiveness means that I can't talk about it anymore. I can't bring it up. I can't tell you that I'm triggered. I can't tell, right? Like forgiveness means that I have to be ready when I say I forgive you to jump into a spousal relationship with you and move on as if nothing's happened. That is like one end of the spectrum, and of forgiveness that is just not healthy. It's not healthy. Again, we have to sit in the reality of what has happened. And that is kind for the betrayer as well. Like they have to sit in the reality of what's happened. If we skip over the reality of life, the reality of consequences with someone who has so far medicated life and medicated consequences and avoided consequences, we're not helping them adjust into real life. Real recovery means that the addict learns how to deal with stressful emotions. Real recovery means that two people can show up with authentic emotions and you don't feel afraid of sharing them. That if the betrayed partner is angry or hurt or sad or whatever, she doesn't feel compelled to word something a certain way to either protect her partner or to avoid an anger outburst, right? So it's important for the betrayed partners to know that it's also good for the addict to experience stress. It's good for the addict to experience difficulty and consequences in life after discovery, because that's part of their healing. And if we push that off, if we avoid it, if we protect them too much, if we don't hold them accountable, if we protect their feelings or protect them from too much stress in their lives because we're taking it on or whatever that is, then we're never really getting to see what they are capable of. And that's really not fair. That's not fair to us to take all of that on. It's not fair to them because we're basically not trusting them to step up to something that is important for them to be able to learn how to step up to. So we have to give our partners opportunity to respond to reality, to respond to emotions, to respond to the reality of life. So when we say forgiveness and we kind of associate that with no accountability and no reality, like it's just like if I say I forgive you today, that means tomorrow we have to go into this new life of happiness and joy. It's just not realistic, not healthy. And typically what will happen there is that's a version of denial that's being chosen because it feels like if we don't address it and I say that I've forgiven you and we have to move on and we never talk about it, that feels like we should be able to create, a life that is okay after that, right? Like there's a sense of, well, if we don't talk about it, then everything should be fine. But what generally happens in that situation is there's so much denial present that over 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever it may be, now you're navigating relationship with all these rocks in your shoes that were never addressed. And at some point, that boils over. There is a pain point that becomes too deep, or resentment or anger or whatever, and it shows up in some way. Okay, so the opposite there is like accountability, but there's no forgiveness, right? So that's again swinging over to that side of like boundaries, control, anger, resentment, and there's no movement towards forgiveness at all. Now, we've talked about this a lot. You don't want to push yourself to forgive too soon. But if there is like no compassion, no empathy, no idea in your heart that you will be able to love this person or connect with this person again because of what they've done to you, that can be extremely problematic for the relationship. And I think if you don't see the potential of forgiveness happening in your relationship, then you really should not stay in that relationship, because it's not going to be physically, emotionally, psychologically healthy for either one of you to stay in that relationship. So again, two opposite ends of the spectrum there, where it's like accountability and anger only or forgiveness only. And again, the healthy middle is when we can hold safe boundaries, we can live our authenticity, and we can share our authentic voice, and we can live in integrity. But we also pair that with forgiveness and compassion and empathy. Now, of course, that's bi-directional, right? So forgiveness towards another human requires, someone taking ownership, having real repentance, changed behavior, that sort of thing. And, forgiveness for each other's faults and boundaries and holding each other accountable. Again, depending on where you are in the recovery journey, setting a boundary is not something that the betrayer, the addict, should really be doing like week one when the betrayed partner is in trauma, right? But like 6 years down the road, 3 years down the road, whatever, you guys are doing the healing work, everything's going well. And then kind of going back to what I was mentioning earlier, part of the addict's recovery journey, getting out of shame, building that integrity, that self-confidence, they have to regain using their voice again as well in the relationship. And that's going to be healing work for the betrayed partner to release the reins and kind of work again in a partnership, right? So those are the struggle points. Those are a lot of the pain points that we're going to have naturally. And so it's very natural for us to want to swing to one end of a spectrum because it feels safer, it feels more black and white, it feels more concrete, feels more justified, whatever that might be. It feels more empowering. But healing is difficult. The nuance is in the middle. I can't always be right. My partner does have great ideas. Yes, they hurt me, and they're really a smart person, and they're kind, and they're trying, and whatever that might look like, right? So just checking in, right? Checking in throughout this episode, like where do I find myself on in these ideas? Am I very often, like in everything Kylene has mentioned today, am I swinging towards like one extreme or the other? Do I generally find myself in the middle? Are there one or two that stand out, right? Just kind of thinking through all of that. And then the last one I'm going to say before I kind of close out here today is perceived strength versus unsafe vulnerability. And I think this is an important one to talk about. So a lot of times there will be male addicts that really feel like I have to put off this appearance of being the strong person. And they have interpretations about what that means, right? A strong person doesn't go to therapy. A strong person doesn't go to group. A manly man doesn't need other people to help him out, right? And that is so not true. Just because you are a strong masculine man doesn't mean that you are not designed and created to be in community with other people. Does not mean that you don't need vulnerability and intimacy in relationships. And I'm not talking about sex. I'm talking about like emotional vulnerability and intimacy with male friends, with your partner, with people in your life that care about you. So when we put off this perception or this air of I have to handle it all, a lot of times that just plays right into the addictive patterns because you are alone. You're not seeking community. You are handling things in a way that is very bottled up and negative, right? And And I'm sure betrayed partners can do this as well, right? So if we step too far into like the masculine energy, or we're too far into resentment or anger, we can feel like, oh, that feels so much more empowering, right? But it's not a healthy place to live. And it's not healthy for us as individual humans. And it's not healthy for our partners. And so if we're just living on this island where we never ask people for help and we never share our fears and our insecurities, and there's no one in our life that really knows the inner workings of our hearts and minds, like that's not a healthy way to live. There's something going on internally that will be hurting you. And that may manifest in unhealthy behaviors, whether it's interrelationally or acting out or whatever that looks like. The opposite side of that, so this like perception, I'm going to project this idea of strength and, I can do it all on my own and that sort of thing. The opposite side of that is unsafe vulnerability. Right. And so that's like getting too vulnerable with people that are actually not offering safety, or I'm going to get too close or too vulnerable with my partner, or I'm going to get too physically intimate with my partner before it's safe. Right. Like there's not enough safety in the relationship, whatever the relationship looks like, whether it's your partner or your friends or your family or whatever. And I'm going to wear my heart on my sleeve. And I don't really have a lot of emotional boundaries. I don't really have a lot of expectations for safety. I don't really know how to gauge, is this safe? And so I just, I want to connect with everybody, but then people end up hurting me, right? And so that can be really damaging emotionally, psychologically. But in the, betrayed and betrayer relationship too, like unsafe vulnerability, like if we're a betrayed partner and the addict is, defensive and angry and not taking ownership and not getting into recovery and all of these kinds of things. And, we talking about that hyper versus hyposexuality earlier, if we go into hypersexuality, that's unsafe vulnerability. We are giving a vulnerable part of ourselves to someone that is not creating safety for us. So we can do that emotionally. We can do that physically. We can, if we are not reaching out to our community because we are trying to protect the emotions of our addict partner. And so then we are not, getting our needs met, right? There's so many different ways that boundaries are really important. We have to come into the middle. So it's not that everybody gets my story and I'm not going to check in to see if it's safe. And that's the unsafe vulnerability. I'm going to be vulnerable with everybody. I'm going to tell everybody. And then I end up getting hurt there. I'm going to, give everything to my partner, even though they've hurt me and there's no safety created, right? That's unhealthy. And then this whole idea of I can do it on my own. I don't need people. That's unhealthy, right? So what's healthy? In the middle, again, where we have integrity, we have boundaries, we know what safety looks like, and we that takes a lot of strength to be in the middle. I think to be able to hold boundaries and then reach out to people that are safe people and to share our story with them, and then be navigating this somewhere in the middle where that takes extreme strength. And so I think rethinking all of these things, like where are we on any of these spectrums? Do we tend to be more extreme, one side or the other? Do we tend to fall mostly in the middle? I hope that this episode, it's a little bit different of an episode than we've done in the past, but I hope that this episode has just offered some food for thought. Maybe there's one thing that stood out to you. Maybe all of it spoke to you. Maybe it helps facilitate a conversation with your partner because maybe both of you are really struggling and you find yourself on opposite extremes, and that can happen as well. So if you are finding yourself on opposite extremes, just constantly fighting with each other versus trying to lean towards each other and find, what is the healthy middle? What is the safe place? What does health really look like in our conversations, in our recovery, in our partnership? What does that actually look like in the middle? So I hope that this has been encouraging. Please check out the links in the show notes. If you are a betrayed partner and you need some support, please go to recoveryoucoaching.com and check out the What's Next course. And then as always, if you have any questions, we are so happy to hear from you and would love for you to submit questions where we can personally respond to them. Every day is a new opportunity to choose health and freedom. Make that choice today, and we will see you next week. Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with Recover You. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.